From number 1 to 35, you need to understand that you must not collude with evil. Because when you start making a little money and things get fun, the roots of greed begin to surface without you even realizing it. When the roots of greed come up, you start wanting to expand your business little by little, wanting to do things on a bigger scale, and a sly mindset begins to emerge. However, in everything from number 1 to 35, you must always be filled with the Holy Spirit, constantly pray, and absolutely never agree with evil. You just need to remember that, no matter what, you must never join hands with evil or with Satan. Since that's a given, I may explain it here and there as needed, but with that as the foundation, I'll start from number 1. Number 1 is you must acknowledge that the Lord is the owner of all things in the universe. You've all heard this before, right? Yes. What I'm going to talk about up to number 35 is something you've probably heard anywhere. These are words you've always heard. But the problem is that people can't apply this to their own lives. Everything in all creation, everything in the universe has a name, right? This belongs to someone, that belongs to Sunja. This is someone else's, that is someone else's. But that's just because we paid money and have ownership rights. But the one who actually made it is God. So even if we buy a house and live in it during our lifetime, after we die, the ownership changes sometimes to our children, sometimes to someone else, but from the beginning to the end, everything belongs to the Lord. In the same way, you must base everything you do completely on this word. Only then, as you move forward through all 35 minutes, will you be able to apply all of this to your life and run the road to success. Yes. As I explain all of this time I'll also be recommending quite a few books. It would be great if you could read those books as well. Yes, but when it comes to the fact that the Lord is the owner of everything, when do people tend to forget this? It's when they're using someone else's things. You know that saying, when you're buying beef for someone else, you tell them to grill it well done. But when someone else is buying it for you, you say beef tastes best when it's just lightly grilled, so you end up eating a lot. That story, what it really means is that we tend to use other people's things carelessly. For example, these days we don't go to saunas as much, but when we do, don't we use as much water as we want? We try to get our money's worth, right? But all those things, from using a single sheet of toilet paper in a public restroom to taking a lot just because something is free somewhere, especially at buffets, you really get to know what kind of person someone is. At a buffet, your true nature is revealed. The moment you go to a buffet that costs 50 to 100,000 won, you can see exactly how that person has lived their life. We end up piling more food on our plates just to throw it away, right? But if you think about it as belonging to God, and remember that children in Africa are starving, those kids have a hard time even getting a single bowl of chicken porridge. All they have every day are beans and a little bit of leftover rice. Right now, the person named Dalsy, who is working with me on this crusade, was in Nepal recently. One morning while we were eating breakfast, he suddenly looked at his phone and his face turned completely red. So we asked, "Hey, what's wrong with your face?" And he said, "I'm just so upset." So we asked, "Why?" He replied that he is feeding 380 orphans every day in Malawi, Africa. From Monday to Friday, he always feeds them. Just think about it, everyone. No matter how little food there is in Africa, feeding 380 people every day is no small task. It's not just about the money, it's a huge undertaking. But what surprised him that morning when he checked his phone was that for some reason he didn't know why 12 or maybe even 20 sacks of beans had all gone bad. They usually boil those beans and serve them with the children's meals, but all the beans had spoiled and the sacks had burst open. So the children were already there, ready to eat, and he didn't know what to do. I asked him how much it was, and he said it was a month's worth, but it had all gone bad. He explained that every April they prepare a year's supply. So last April as well, when we were giving a finance lecture or something at Suji Eden Church, I suggested that we take up an offering to send money to Africa. And we collected an offering and sent about $6,000. So when April comes, they eat the last of the beans they have left, and then they have to prepare for the year by receiving donations and support from people. But just before we went to Nepal, about 2 or 3 weeks before, the beans all went bad, and they were really distressed and on the verge of tears. So just at that time, Koreans are really good at responding immediately and obeying. There was this Korean well, actually an American, but of Korean descent. Someone who had lived in the US for a long time. That couple and I were sitting together and we asked, how much would it cost to cover a month's worth of these beans? When we asked, they said it would cost $700 to feed 380 children for a month. That's about 700,000 to 800,000 won. So right there, the two of us paid the full amount, and the person was wondering what to do about it. But as they were worrying, the look of concern on their face quickly turned into a smile. But as this person smiled, tears started streaming down their face. They were just so grateful. So, these children should be able to eat such precious food like you all do. But when we go to buffets, there's so much we just taste and then throw away. So when you think about it, in the end, what we have isn't really ours, it belongs to others. God is watching over all of this. And through that, we all come to know God. We come to realize what kind of humanity we possess and with what kind of heart we handle our finances. Isn't that right? That's why we say that God is the true owner of all wealth, even in a public restroom that no one is watching over. When you go to a hotel, the bathrooms are so nice, aren't they? Sometimes you don't even want to leave, right? Even while enjoying such a nice clean space, we need to remember that every single piece of toilet paper there belongs to the Lord. When we do that, God begins to trust us as faithful stewards, and as a result, the way opens for the resources He has prepared in advance for us to come into our lives. So honoring Him isn't just about coming to church to pray and worship, though that's good, of course, but we need to be conscious of Him in our everyday lives. So in our daily lives, we need to acknowledge the Lord and recognize that everything in this world and the entire universe belongs to Him. That's how we avoid disappointing Him as He watches over us. To do that, we must remember that everything belongs to the Lord, whether it's something in the church when we go there, or even things at someone's house. Nothing is truly ours. It all belongs to the Lord. Even if we buy something with our own money, that money belongs to the Lord, and so does the thing we purchase. That's why we must always be careful, because we can never forget that God is watching us. Everyone, you understood point number 1, right? Yes. But this first point is the most important, everyone. If you don't get this first point, everything else will collapse like dominoes from here on out. Point number 1 must be completely and perfectly present in your life. Just think about it. Even if you're chewing gum and spit it out on the street, God would say, why are you spitting gum on my land? That's how it is. That's how much all this land, the air, and all these unseen spiritual things, they all belong to the Lord. So you really need to keep point number 1 deeply engraved in your hearts. And for point number 2, you need to think of your job or business as doing your Father's work. For example, in the past, when speakers would travel by plane, the person sitting next to them would ask, where are you going? We Koreans usually don't talk much to people next to us. Even in elevators, we don't really talk unless we know them. But foreigners are really good at striking up conversations with people they've never met before. So on the plane, if someone asks, where are you going? You might say, oh, I'm going for my father's business. Then they ask, what does your father do? And you reply, oh, my father is our Lord in heaven, that kind of thing. But all the things we do, they're not really our own work. We are doing God's work, our Father's work, as heirs on this earth. Yes, but since we are sent out as parts of God's body to every corner, even though we all look different, have different colors and different names in those places, we are living as those who represent the Father wherever we are. So one person might be a police officer, another a school teacher, another a janitor, But we don't need to assign any sense of superiority or inferiority to those jobs. We can just think of ourselves as having been assigned to those places. So today you might be working as a nurse, and then after studying a bit more, maybe a year later you could go on to work as a doctor. It all depends on our will, our intentions, and how the Lord leads us to fulfill His purpose. We just need to follow that guidance and move forward in whatever form it takes. So in everything we do, if you think, this is my job, what am I doing? And you try to carry all the weight on your own, it will be hard for you. As I mentioned yesterday, if you try to do everything by yourself, it becomes difficult. It is the one who dwells within us who does the work, and we should simply lend our body so that He can do His work through us. That is how everything succeeds. So, as I said before, when I first started, I said I would leave myself out of the discussion about being filled with the Holy Spirit, but I also mentioned that it keeps coming back to this. That's why we do the Father's work through the fullness of the Holy Spirit. So, regardless of our occupation or status, whatever we do, we should think of it as doing our Father's work here on earth and shining His light in this place. When we shine that kind of light and do the Father's work, what we need to have in our minds is the attitude of turning 5 talents into 10 talents. This comes from wisdom. But in everything, everyone, don't just think about money. For example, I'll talk a bit later about making it your purpose to serve others, but the ultimate purpose of all of this is for us to show goodness to people on this earth, to reveal the Father, and in doing so, to receive what the Father gives us, that is, to receive the wages of a worker. However, even as we do this work, you should also remember to think about increasing all resources with the wisdom of the Lord, who abundantly provides all wealth. Yeah. It's not just about working hard at what you're told to do. God is always wise, so you need to make all the calculations according to His wisdom. That's why, if you look at it, I am doing the Father's business. For example, let's imagine that I am a daughter of the Samsung family. Let's say we're daughters of the Samsung family, and we're working at the Schiller Hotel. Would we worry about our salary or not? Now imagine you're a daughter of Hyundai. You're out doing an internship, working as an intern, and you think, what if my father doesn't pay me a salary? You work without that worry, right? So we don't have to worry about that. We just work hard thinking we're doing our Father's work, right? Do you understand? Yes. So that's what this is about, everyone. Number 3, you need to have the mindset that you are the owner. I am the owner. Now, having the mindset that I am the owner is actually really important. This is something I really want to talk about a lot. I started working when I was 20. So I've tried out a lot of different jobs. I did part-time jobs, but I also tried running a business, starting my own ventures, and really experienced all sorts of businesses. But whether it's in business or in a company, people who succeed always stand out. You can tell who they are. What those people always have in their mindset is that they treat their work as if it's their home. For example, when I go to Pyeongtaek, there's a restaurant I visit sometimes, and it's a place where a lot of Americans come. But when I go there, there's a woman who speaks English really well and serves customers so energetically and confidently. So whenever I went, I always thought she was the owner of the place. She works so hard and does her job so well. She'll even notice if something is empty as she walks by and refill it without being asked. So I asked her, "Oh, are you the owner here?" But she said no, she was just an employee. You see, people who have a strong sense of ownership, who act like they're the owner, always impress customers wherever they go. That's why among successful people, the first thing you'll notice is that most of them have a sense of ownership. Since I also have a lot of employees working for me, I've noticed that people who always see themselves as the main player in their work, who think of themselves as the owner, usually end up opening their own business before long. Those kinds of people will do even better when they have their own thing. Working for someone else and getting a salary, they treat the job as if it's their own. So no matter what work you do, you need to make it so clear that Even customers get confused and think you're the owner, that people can immediately sense this person must be the owner because of their actions. That's what you should aim for. So whatever you do, approach it with an owner's mindset. When I was in my 20s and got a job at a company, the official start time was 9 o'clock and the end time was 6. But I would arrive at work at 7:30. I always got to work at 7:30 and was the first to arrive and clean up before anyone else. And I was always the last one to leave work. I would bring a stack of documents home, organize all the paperwork that had piled up, go to bed around midnight, and then wake up at 6. I'd take all those documents back to the office, clean up in the morning, and have everything sorted and ready. But there was actually a reason why I went to work so early back then. At that time, I didn't really believe in God, but this is kind of a separate story from that. These two things are a bit unrelated. But just to make things a bit more interesting, let me tell you a story. When I was in my 20s, I worked at a company where the boss liked to hang out with his friends at night and play poker for fun. It wasn't really hardcore gambling, more just for fun. Back then, I was about 26 or 27, and since I used to get to work a bit early, I would sometimes find traces of their late-night poker games, like instant noodle cups and poker chips left behind. One time, while I was cleaning up and wiping down the table, I found 100,000 won inside the table. This was exactly 30 years ago, and back then, 100,000 won was a huge amount. So I took the money and gave it to my boss. I told him, I found this 100,000 won while cleaning, so I'm giving it to you. Then he said, oh, thanks for cleaning up. My friends must have left it there for you. So after that, you think I worked even harder or not? From then on, I started coming to work even earlier and cleaned really diligently. Yes, and although it wasn't always the same 100,000 won, sometimes it was 30,000 won, sometimes 100,000 won, and when there was a lot, even more than that, going to work became so enjoyable for me. Because I worked so hard, the money I received that way ended up being more than 3 times my salary. And the second thing is, I once taught math to elementary school students for a while. With elementary school students and kindergartners, so in the mornings I was a teacher at an academy, and when the kindergartners arrived, I would teach them Korean. After lunch, around 3 or 4 in the afternoon, the elementary school students would come, and I would teach them math. I don't really like math, but somehow I ended up doing that job. But the director of the academy said that since there were too few students, after sending the kindergartners home at noon and having lunch, from 1 to 3 o'clock, I should go to the elementary school to recruit students and tell them to come to the academy. He said that if I recruited students and brought them in, he would give me the first month's tuition fee. At that time, the first month's tuition was 60,000 won. That's for a month, for the kids to take math. But he said he would give me that 60,000 won. Back then, my monthly salary was 40,000 won. My monthly salary was 40,000 won. So I thought, how can I do this wisely? So I made those clear plastic rulers that kids like. You know, if you go to a laminating shop, they give them to you. So when all the elementary school kids were coming out, I went to the elementary school, stood right in front of the school gate, and said, hey kids, I'll give you this for free, line up. Then the kids all lined up. So while I was handing out the rulers, I collected all their home phone numbers. If it were now, there would be a huge fuss about personal information and all that, but back then, I just collected all their phone numbers. After collecting all of them, once I finished teaching the kids in the afternoon, I started calling their mothers from 6 in the evening. I would say, hello, I'm a teacher from such and such academy. I don't know how it is with academy teachers these days, but back then, when you said you were a teacher, mothers really respected that title. So I would explain to them how I teach math to certain grades of elementary students and give them all sorts of advice. Since I was talking to them not as a salesperson but as an academy teacher, the mothers really liked it. They would ask me everything they were curious about. Because of this, so many students enrolled that from the academy director's perspective, my salary was almost a waste compared to the number of hours I actually taught. So I had to keep doing the recruiting. I was so good at recruiting that I would bring in almost 30 new students every month. So my salary couldn't even be compared to a typical academy teacher's pay. Whatever I did, I always put in my best effort. And it was fun too. Isn't it fun? Looking back now, I don't think I was ever the type to just do one thing at a time. I would do this while doing that and then do something else while doing another thing. So while the academy salary was nice, the extra commission I got from recruiting was so big that I realized, wow, sales can be really fun. But it wasn't always that great. Sometimes when I went to apartment complexes and set things up, old men would come out, yell at me, and even curse. But honestly, it was only shocking the first time I heard it. After hearing it more than 10 times, it didn't really bother me anymore. Yes. So from that point on, I started treating my work as if it were truly my own, no matter what it was. Later on, the company president ended up shutting down the business, whether it went bankrupt or he just closed it, I'm not sure, and left. There were 33 employees at the time. But out of all those employees, I was the only one he invited to join him in building a bigger company. This was the first terminal at the academy I mentioned earlier. I would come in early in the morning and earn money. Because from his perspective, it wasn't that I was just there for the money. I would come in very early, diligently clean everything, and work really hard. I think he was grateful because in his eyes, I treated the work as if it were my own. So this is really important, everyone. No matter where you go or what kind of work you do, God is watching you even more closely than the owner of the office or your workplace. It may seem like it's the boss who gives you promotions, moves you to better positions or increases your salary, but in the end, it's the Lord who provides all of that. So I think it would be good for us to approach all our work with that kind of sincerity and diligence. Now, sometimes I'll say this just for fun, but since I didn't go to a vocational high school, I didn't know how to use a computer. But when I was in my 20s, the 386 PC had just come out. That bulky 386 PC had just been released. And at the first company I worked for, when I first joined that company, I was either 26 or 27. And there were 2 female employees who were 23 years old. But those women had graduated from vocational high schools. So they were really good at typing. But I couldn't type. And since all the documents they were done by hand, I never even thought about using the computer and was just working really hard. Then one day, the owner of our office, the boss, brought in 2 computers. So he set them down in front of us and said, from now on, there's no need to do things by hand, do everything on the computer. How do you think I felt all of a sudden, everyone? I had only been at the company for 3 months. And even though those colleagues started before me, I became the supervisor and was promoted above them. Because I worked so hard, the boss promoted me right above them. But now when they type on the computer and do their work, everything gets saved on the computer, so there's no need for me to sign off on documents anymore. That was the moment my position started to feel threatened. So I went straight to the boss and told him that something urgent had come up and I needed to take a week off from work. He asked, what happened? I told him it was something really important and asked if I could take a week off, and he said, all right. So I got a week off, and on my way home, I asked my husband to get me a 386 PC, and he brought it home for me. After bringing it home, I asked the girl who lived next door, she was attending EWHA Women's University, and was good with computers, to teach me how to type in Korean. She came over and taught me how to type in Korean, as well as how to use the tools and menus. I practically fasted and barely slept for a whole week, practicing typing day and night. By the end of that week, I could type even better than students who had attended vocational high schools for 3 years. So even now, I can type in Korean really fast. After practicing like that for a week, I went to work. I asked the boss, why aren't you giving me a PC? Why aren't you giving me a computer? He said, but you graduated from a liberal arts high school. You don't know how to use it. So I replied, who said I don't know how to use it? I said, I'm good at it. Please give me one. He was like, oh, really? Then he said, okay, and bought me one. That's how I was able to keep my position. I'm not trying to brag about myself. I'm just sharing an episode that happened 30 years ago. If you approach everything with that kind of passion, not out of selfish ambition, but a desire for passion itself, you'll be able to achieve things bigger and faster than you imagine. That's how you can succeed more quickly too. Yes. That's exactly what passion is. Having passion is the most important thing. And it's with that passion that I was able to do my Father's work. It's not even someone else's work, it's my own Father's work. So how great is that, right? Yes. Now, let's say instead of something you're good at, you suddenly have to do something like landscaping at a temple or decorating a temple to make it look nice. Would you want to do that? I personally wouldn't want to do it. Yes. But if you think of all the work we do in this world as doing my Father's work, as if I'm doing what belongs to my Father, then you'll feel even more joy and you'll gain a sense of confidence that you're accomplishing something yourself, which is really great.